Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Marcus and Lena built their life together on solid ground. They met through a close friend of Marcus's, someone who unknowingly brought together two people who seemed made for each other. From the start, they noticed affinities that went beyond surface-level interests. They were quiet people who preferred the calm of long conversations over the excitement of big parties. 2 years of dating were enough for both of them to decide to get married and start a simple, yet meaningful routine. Their home reflected that bond. It was a space where silence didn't feel awkward and just being near each other was enough. After work, they'd often cook together, share a plate of pasta or an improvised dinner, laughing at inside jokes only they understood. Nights were filled with TV shows that became traditions, and weekends were spent on shared chores that, to them, carried sentimental value. Marcus worked in tech and saw in that stability something rare. Lena gave off a sense of security, a woman who seemed to have both feet firmly on the ground, without needing grand gestures to prove who she was. The first years of marriage passed without major turbulence. There were occasional arguments, but nothing that threatened their bond. Both valued peace in the relationship and believed the secret lay in trust and respect. But this routine began to change almost imperceptibly when Lena received a job offer from a real estate agency. Marcus was happy for her. He saw the opportunity as a career step forward and a reason to be proud. He believed it would bring new challenges and achievements, not realizing it would also open the door to changes that went far beyond the professional. Starting the new job brought a different energy. Lena came home talking about clients, goals, and the competitive environment. She mentioned two coworkers often, Vanessa and Paige, describing funny situations and curious stories from the office. Marcus listened closely, happy to see her excited. At that moment, he didn't realize these new friendships would grow to have an increasingly heavy impact on his life. Over the following weeks, small signs began to appear. Lena started staying late at the office, saying she needed to invest in networking to close more deals. At first, Marcus believed her. After all, sales required relationships and constant contact. But little by little, their conversations became shorter. Before, she'd show interest in his topics, ask questions, give her opinion. Now, she seemed always in a rush, her mind somewhere else. Despite this subtle shift, Marcus still held on to the image of the woman he had married. He believed that periods of greater work focus were normal. And in fact, nothing outright suggested a serious problem. Still, there was something in the way she talked about Vanessa and Paige that caught his attention. Those names came up in nearly every conversation, always followed by comments about events, hangouts, or future plans. This initial phase of change was quiet, but full of meaning. Marcus felt the peaceful life they had built beginning to shift into a different rhythm, more hectic and less centered on what they shared. Though there were still no open conflicts, something essential was changing. He just didn't know, at that moment, how far this transformation would take them. The following weeks brought signs Marcus preferred to ignore, but that were there, firm and taking up space in his days. Conversations that once flowed naturally became quick, almost mechanical. When he shared something about work or anything from his day, Lena seemed to hear without really listening, replying with short phrases, as if her mind was always elsewhere. Her attention, once divided between their shared life and future plans, now seemed focused on a world he had no access to. There were moments when Marcus tried to break through that barrier. He'd prepare a meal she liked, suggest watching a movie that always made them laugh, or bring up topics that used to spark good conversation. Sometimes it seemed to work, but soon her expression would close off again. It was as if an invisible wall was being built, brick by brick, separating them. The distance also showed in subtler ways. Simple gestures, like a hand on her waist while cooking or a spontaneous kiss, started being met with resistance. Lena would pull back with quick excuses, she was focused on the recipe, she was tired, she needed to finish something on her phone. Marcus tried to understand, telling himself that phases of distraction were normal, but the feeling that something was changing grew stronger every day. It was on an ordinary afternoon that certainty began to form. Marcus arrived home earlier than usual and, upon opening the door, heard voices coming from the living room. It wasn't uncommon for Lena to talk with friends, but something in the tone caught his attention. He immediately recognized the names that had become so familiar, Vanessa and Paige. The three were laughing, but the conversation slowly shifted from light to something that felt like a punch. Vanessa was talking about how men get comfortable once they think the relationship is secure. Paige agreed, adding that to make a man truly care, you had to create the feeling that he could lose everything at any moment. Then came the sentence that turned Marcus's stomach: the best way to do that is to disappear for a while, vanish on purpose. He stayed silent, just listening, and that's when he heard Lena's voice, lower, almost confessional, saying she had seriously considered adopting that strategy. For Marcus, it was like suddenly witnessing a hidden part of his own marriage being revealed. Her words didn't sound like a passing complaint, but like a decision slowly taking shape. When he decided to step in and interrupt the conversation, the mood changed instantly. He asked what was going on, making it clear that those ideas sounded like poison to any relationship. Lena reacted as if she'd been caught doing something unfair, accusing him of eavesdropping and misinterpreting everything. The conversation didn't lead to reconciliation, but to even greater distance. From that moment on, Marcus realized something essential had broken. It wasn't just about the influence of her friends, but about her willingness to treat their relationship like a testing ground for a power game. This understanding, silent and painful, began to completely change the way he saw their marriage. Sunday began with a sentence that changed everything. Lena appeared already dressed, slung her bag over her shoulder, and said she'd be staying at Vanessa's for the week. She used the word space like someone offering a bitter but inevitable medicine. Marcus asked her to explain further. He heard it was time to reassess the relationship, that it would be good for both of them, that it would bring clarity. He asked if there was anything specific that needed fixing. She responded with vague concepts: appreciation, priority, perspective. The speech sounded rehearsed, almost practiced, as if she'd repeated it before to someone who applauded every word. He took a breath and simply asked when she'd return. In 7 days. She emphasized that this would help him feel her absence and understand what was at risk. The tone wasn't a request, it was strategy. Marcus realized they were trying to turn the marriage into a chessboard. There was a strange conviction in Lena's eyes, as if she believed control was the same as love. He recognized the script, the same one he'd heard from her friends. Those phrases weren't born from real discomfort between them, but from a formula, as if someone had handed her a step-by-step guide and she was following each instruction. When the door closed, the silence felt heavy, but not empty. It was a silence that held a decision. Marcus walked through the house, picked up 2 mugs, put away silverware, opened his laptop to answer overdue emails. He wasn't running from what he felt, he was organizing himself inside. His mind, which had been spinning in circles looking for an explanation, started putting facts in order. He reviewed the past few months like someone debugging code: job change, initial excitement, growing influence of Vanessa and Paige, the conversation in the living room about disappearing to gain power. Nothing there suggested a sincere effort to communicate. Everything smelled like a test. That afternoon, he pulled an old folder from the drawer. Inside were marriage documents, receipts, contracts. He didn't look at photos. He didn't want to stir up memories, he wanted practical references. Then he opened his browser and searched for family lawyers. He picked 3 names, read reviews, compared information. He chose one: Ethan Cole, straightforward office, little advertising, many client reports about clean, discreet cases. He sent a message through the contact form, got an automatic reply, and half an hour later, Ethan himself called, direct and suggesting a consultation on Monday. The conversation with the lawyer was a turning point. Ethan listened without rushing and, before talking about paperwork, asked what Marcus truly wanted. Peace, he answered. The lawyer explained options: legal separation, mediation, direct divorce. He outlined timelines, costs, and consequences. No exaggerated promises. In the end, Ethan said something that stuck with him: when a relationship becomes a tool for control, choices stop being about love and start being about territory. In territory, the one who wins is the one who clearly defines boundaries. Marcus hung up with a possible plan, simple and honest with himself. On Tuesday at work, he resolved an emergency with the company's system. It was an integration failure that brought down an entire module. The team suggested temporary fixes, band-aids, pushing the problem off. Marcus remembered an old incident with an intern named Ben who insisted on a quick fix that caused even bigger losses the next day. Back then, Marcus took the blame, explained the impact, and did a full rollback. It hurt, but it saved the product. That memory came back complete, with beginning, middle, and end, the mistake, the tough decision, the secure outcome. He repeated the pattern. He canceled the temporary fix, rebuilt the integration with the team, stabilized the system, and sent a clear report to management. When he finished, his mind felt more aligned. In tech, shortcuts are usually expensive. In marriage, they cost even more. On the third night, Ethan sent the initial documents for digital signature. Before signing, Marcus went out to clear his head. Not to overthink, but to check if he was acting on impulse. He stopped by a cafe he rarely visited and saw a scene that stuck with him: an elderly couple, Evelyn and Harold. He heard their names when the server called them. Evelyn complained because Harold had changed the TV plan without telling her. He admitted the mistake, apologized without drama, and suggested they sit down later to adjust the channels she cared about. The conversation was short and mature. Zero games. There was firmness and kindness on the same plate. They laughed and shared a slice of cake. A small, complete story right in front of him: real problem, objective solution, practical reconciliation. Marcus realized this was what he recognized as love: imperfect, but willing to solve things on the same field, at the same table. He went home and reread what Ethan had prepared. No attacks, no angry long messages. Just facts, dates, legal terms. He signed. There was no anger in the act. It was a way to protect what remained of himself and the respect he still had for what they'd lived. He sent the documents, and minutes later, the confirmation arrived. The process had started. On the fourth day, Vanessa sent Marcus a message, something that surprised him: Lena is okay. She needs this time. Give her what she deserves. He read it twice. Didn't reply. He realized the conversation wasn't with his wife anymore, it was with the ideology of someone who treats other people's marriages like interactive TV shows. He deleted the notification and went to water the plant on the balcony. Simple as that. He chose to care for what was alive there, under his responsibility. That night, Marcus's sister Claire called. She'd always been direct. What's going on? He summarized it in 3 sentences, without ugly details. Claire stayed silent for a moment and then shared a story about her ex-boyfriend, Luke. She said one day he showed up with the idea of taking a break to measure how much he'd miss her. She agreed, unsure, thinking it would be 2 days. Luke escalated, disappeared for nearly a month, then came back demanding proof of loyalty. Claire said she learned her lesson there: where love exists, the proof is presence. If you chose divorce, let it be because it's the path to your peace. Not to punish anyone. They said goodbye feeling lighter. Beginning, middle, and end in 3 minutes, attempt at a game, breakup, lesson learned. On the 5th day, Ethan informed Marcus that the petition had been filed and notifications would be sent soon. He suggested Marcus organize the house neutrally, his belongings on one side, hers preserved on the other, accounts and receipts in order. Marcus separated documents, labeled folders, stored memories in separate boxes, without tearing up letters, without deleting photos. Nothing about erasing his own history to pretend it never happened. The past remained as a record of a good phase that had simply gone off track. By the 7th day, she still hadn't arrived, but the scene was already set. On the counter, he left a clear folder with Ethan's documents, plain cover, no resentful note, just what was necessary. Next to it, an envelope with passwords for shared services, instructions for cancellations, and cost splits for the next month. No financial surprises, no emotional drama. Instead of a speech, organization. Instead of shouting, a map. Before leaving for a walk to clear his mind, Marcus paused at the door and did one final honesty check with himself. If Lena knocked on that door asking to talk, he'd agree to speak respectfully. If she came with the same space strategy, he'd stick to his path. This wasn't coldness, it was commitment to a principle. Marriage is resolved face to face, not through calculated absence. He took a breath, put his phone in his pocket, and for the first time in a long while, felt that his own life was responding to a mature decision. The week they tried to measure pain as a tool of power would end where beginnings and endings always meet, in the choice of someone who picks peace through their own actions. When Lena returned home, her face carried the look of someone expecting a reunion. Maybe she imagined finding Marcus anxious to see her, ready to hear any excuse and leave everything behind. But what she found was very different. As soon as she stepped into the kitchen, her eyes fell on the counter. There sat a clear folder with documents she immediately recognized. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. Just seeing the signature at the bottom of the first page made her legs tremble. Her phone was in her hand before she could think. She called Marcus, her voice shaky. "Where are you?" "Walking," he replied, calmly. "I'm on my way back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena stood frozen, staring at the folder as if it were a physical barrier. When Marcus walked in, the door hadn't even closed behind him before he said, with the firmness of someone with no doubts. "I put your things in the garage. Please take them and leave." Lena stepped back, as if the words had weight. Tears came quickly, and she tried to speak through sobs. "It's not what you think, it was just a silly joke. I've cut ties with those friends, I swear, but it doesn't end like this, not with me." Marcus stood still, unmoved by her desperation. "You wanted to turn our marriage into a game. And I don't play." She stepped closer, pleading, her voice already out of control. "I didn't know you'd take it so seriously. I love you." But he kept his tone firm, cutting off any emotional appeal. "Take your things, Lena." Between sobs and rapid breathing, she walked to the garage, opened the car trunk, and placed the boxes he had organized inside. Before driving off, she looked at him one last time, as if still hoping he'd change his mind. There was no response, no movement. Then she left, and the sound of the engine fading marked the end of that scene. Later, Marcus's phone started ringing. Vanessa was first. "Marcus, you can't do this. She's not okay, she needs you. Can't you think this through calmly?" He listened without reacting. "The decision is made." The call ended. Soon after, Paige tried. "You're making a huge mistake. She just wanted to shake things up, see if you." "Paige, it's not your life to live." And he hung up. The process moved forward quietly but steadily. Marcus avoided overthinking, preferring to keep his mind occupied with work and small routines. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang. It was Lena's number. He hesitated for a second before answering. On the other end, her breathing sounded fast, as if she'd been running or crying before calling. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Marcus. I'm pregnant." He stayed silent. The world seemed to compress the space between words and reality. He didn't respond right away. He needed to weigh what he was hearing against what he knew. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm but firm. "That doesn't make sense. We haven't been together in a long time." There was a loaded pause. Then she insisted, almost pleading. "It's yours, I'm sure. There's no chance it could be anyone else." Marcus felt a mix of disbelief and coldness. He wouldn't turn this conversation into an accusation field. He took a deep breath and replied. "The divorce will continue." On the other end, muffled crying began. She said he was being unfair, that this was a moment when he should support her. But Marcus ended the call, knowing that any extra words would open doors he had already closed. A few weeks later, the separation was finalized. Marcus, holding the court order, asked his lawyer to include a request for a non-invasive DNA test in the case. When Lena found out, her reaction was immediate and explosive. The call came the same day. "I won't go through with this. I don't have to prove anything to you." Her voice carried anger and offense, but also a trace of fear Marcus easily noticed. He simply replied. "Then we'll let the judge decide." At the final hearing, the atmosphere was tense. Lena kept her arms crossed, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. His lawyer presented the request, grounded in the legal right to clarify paternity. The judge listened carefully, looked at Lena, and said in a tone that allowed no argument. "You will take the test. It's a court order." She looked away, lips tight. It was clear she didn't want to, but there was no way out. Days later, the results arrived at Ethan's office, Marcus's lawyer. He called to say the document was ready. Marcus went to pick it up. He didn't ask anyone to read it to him. He took the envelope, sat in his car, and opened it right there. His eyes quickly scanned the lines of the report. Genetic incompatibility. The conclusion was clear, he was not the father. Marcus closed the envelope and placed it on the passenger seat. There was no relief, no anger, just a heavy silence. It was the final proof that what had once been love had already been lost long before the signatures, the fights, and the divorce papers. That week when Lena left home saying she needed space, the reality was very different from the image she tried to give Marcus. When she arrived at Vanessa's, she was welcomed like someone who had just escaped an invisible prison. The friends opened wine bottles on the first night, laughing loudly and saying it was time to finally live. The advice quickly turned into a series of invitations to parties, dates, and outings that had nothing to do with reflection or reassessing a marriage. On the second night, Lena was already at a bar with Vanessa and Paige, surrounded by people she'd never seen before. With loud music and glasses that never seemed to empty, she started getting attention from men who looked at her with interest. At first, she told herself it was just fun, something harmless. But with each drink, the barriers that once seemed solid began to fade. The following days followed the same pattern: parties at friends' acquaintances' apartments, impromptu meetups at bars, even a night at a beach house rented by a group whose names she barely knew. Alcohol flowed without control, and with it, impulsive decisions became easier to justify. Lena stopped counting hours, stopped caring about what she'd told Marcus. At one of those parties, she ended up involved with a man she didn't know, and later that week, with another. Neither represented any kind of bond or intention to continue. They were shallow, impulsive encounters, fueled by excitement and temporary euphoria. When the week ended and she returned home, she carried only a hazy memory of moments she'd rather not detail. There was no visible regret, not yet. But weeks later, when she found out she was pregnant, the impact was brutal. What should have been a significant announcement came with an unbearable weight. She had no idea who the father was. The worst part for Lena wasn't just the uncertainty about paternity. It was knowing that, for Marcus, no explanation could erase what had happened. And deep down, She knew he wouldn't need to know all the details to understand that that week of space had destroyed any chance of going back. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.